Good morning for us in Los Angeles, Venice specifically, and Philip is with me in Irvine, I believe.
No, basically Laguna Beach, but
Laguna
Aliso
Beach.
Viejo. Like I'm like
Okay.
3 minutes
We're
away.
both at the beach. I'm in Venice. And good morning to anyone listening. This is our third episode of the Pedro, Philip, and Jack without Pedro. He has opted out today. There have been some issues over my interruptions and tendency to do that. And the point of our getting together in these discussions is to confront the patterns that seem so normal of stories that are told to excuse ourselves from being responsible for the things that we do. And my purpose here is not to operate like I'm under the guide of Robert's rules or any UN Security Council formality that allows people to continue to talk about things that I see as basically promoting ideas that are not only untrue, but are diseased and sick and promoting their own disease or their own ill health. And I want to interrupt those things. And I do that. And I'm not great at this conversation. I only participate in it so that I can be better. And being better doesn't mean not eliciting reactions, but actually looking for the reactions, because those tend to be the things that I have learned I tend to keep to myself and make believe that because I don't share them and don't express them, that somehow they're not acting on me, when in fact they become this subterranean sensation of despair and disturbance that always leads me back to something that has to become so wrong that I can't finally ignore it because I've been ignoring the thing I'm doing in the meantime. So I don't really look to avoid that. I look to find that. And it isn't because we aren't on an absolute peaceful basis that I look for that. I look for that knowing that that peaceful basis gives us clarity to recognize what is wrong and what we're doing. And we don't always want to have the perspective to admit it to ourselves. So we continue to perpetuate it as though it's something that can't be anything other than what it is. And that would be the maintenance of lies, basically being reacted to in a present state of awareness where we always have the choice to stop, but think the only thing we can do is to continue to maintain it. And so my purpose in this discussion is to actually engage with others and look for those spots, look for those weaknesses in thought, look for those vulnerabilities and talk about it openly so that the ability we have to face it becomes more normal than the ability that we have to deny, fight, and make believe it isn't happening. My experience is that what I've mostly struggled with are things I don't even think I'm doing. And the longer I make the claims that all that's happening is what I'm thinking about in the language that I think in is all that's happening, is a justification to make believe that the things I'm denying, I'm not denying, and as a result, wonder why these things seem to pop up and impact me in ways that I claim not to expect when I'm claiming it's catching me off guard or they're catching me off guard, when in fact being off guard suggests that I'm always on guard trying to defend against that awareness. And I would say that is an awareness. If I'm doing it and thinking I'm not doing it, the fight that's caused by that is a form of awareness that I know exactly what I'm doing while I'm trying only to rely on this hyperventilation of reactive, obsessive thoughts to keep my attention distracted from what I know I'm doing by obsessing over things that aren't even happening as a seeming attraction when I'm using it as a distraction and an intoxication to keep me from noticing what I am doing. So I'm here with Philip today. This will be our first two-person discussion for any length on with the episodes. And I want to be frank. I want to be honest. Philip and I have worked together for 10 years, Philip.
Yeah, around that.
Yeah, about 10 years. And Philip was very young when he came into this conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I was 25. I was 5 years sober. But I'll be honest, I was aware of the mental obsession since I was like 7, 8 years old, when I couldn't go to sleep at night and I would have to think myself to sleep for 2 hours sitting in my bed at 9 o'clock for the next day. And I remember seeking and searching for the thought to end all thought. And that only compounded itself when I found a temporary relief in for me specifically, marijuana and alcohol. And then Yeah, I ended up eventually getting sober because acting on those thoughts and impulses only led to me suffering and having more pain. So I got to a place where I had to learn and listen and change, and to see that the way that I was operating based on my stories, based on, to be honest, past traumas. There was a lot of, physical past traumas growing up with my parents that I couldn't necessarily avoid. They were stuck in my body, stuck in my thought processes. But when I got sober, it gave me the opportunity to start dealing with it and start to learn as an adult. I'm the only one who's technically still carrying whatever happened in the past into the present and continually recreating it over and over again. So I think for me, the way I came in, because I was very willing to change and I wanted to change, and I saw the opportunity that I have the rest of my life, being 20 when I came in, to to achieve goals that, I still haven't achieved, but they were goals that most of the world, you know, thinks are ridiculous, which is, being a working Oscar caliber actor. So, but I knew for me to even have a chance at that, being sober was important. So for me, having goals that were bigger than my current reality made me willing enough to listen and to change my approach whenever I found that it didn't work or it caused enough pain for me to realize that if I continue to go in this way, it will be game over, which, for me, it was, uh, death, jails, and institutions, as they say. And I was willing to change and listen. And with Jack, what you're talking about, I think, a lot of people are not willing necessarily to listen fully and being willing to change and adapt, because they're still attached to their stories. No, and that's okay. In my opinion, I have a different approach where, I've learned through my experience with working with other people, but this is also because it's professionally in my B career, working with people with mental health issues. You have to meet them where they're at, in that profession. However, you know, this conversation, uh, 12-step programs, all that stuff, it's for fun and for free. So we're all able to choose what we're willing to do and what boundaries we're willing to do. And you know what? Some people, it takes time for them to get to the point where they're really willing and willing to listen and change and look at their stories objectively. That's the hard part, is moving from that subjective story to you're subjectively dealing with the stories in your head and trapped in your nervous system and all that stuff, to trying to deal with it objectively, seeing it as a story first and beginning to work through it. That just takes time. And at 15 years of sobriety, I I know that's the process, and I'm willing to do that because I still have goals that are bigger than where I'm at right now. And that's okay. I may never achieve them, which is fine, but I'm willing to attempt to continue to grow and change and to be whatever my higher power wants me to be, rather than what my stories define I am, and allow that to limit the possibilities of what the work I could do in the world. But not everybody has that understanding. And I would say yet,
So
not everyone has that understanding yet.
my contest would be they absolutely have that understanding, and they wouldn't react and fight if they didn't. If they weren't aware, it wouldn't even occur to them to react. What would they react to? What would they oppose? It's a thought they're holding that gives them the impression, that's a lie, that gives them the impression when they think it's true, which is what a lie is, a thought that's wrong being thought of as right, that is being defended in the reactions and in the denial and in the delusion. And that's the underlying source. That's the disease. Well, this is not a program. We're not talking from a program here. We're just talking. We're having a discussion. But it reflects the core issue in all impulsive, reactive, and compulsive behaviors. No compulsion that I've ever had and that I've ever known anyone to have has been healthy, because their actions, reactions based on unhealthy thoughts. And to the degree that I maintain ideas, one of them last week, you talked about anchors of thoughts, PTSD, anchors of thoughts in your system. And today you talked about being trapped. When I consider that those things are real and those thoughts are trapped, why wouldn't I struggle to get rid of them while I'm maintaining a thought that they're intractable? I'm creating the consequence I'm asking to be healed from, or God or a higher power should remove from me, while I'm actively persisting and maintaining the condition by choice that I'm so ashamed of and know I'm guilty for, because I feel both those things. And the only distraction I can think of is just to continue to do it, thinking that someday it'll pay off, like doubling down at the blackjack table. And eventually you double down 6 or 8 times. You don't have any money left. There's nowhere to go anymore. You're bankrupt. And it's not because eventually you're going to lose. It's because the losing thought in the beginning that somehow doubling down. If you had an infinite amount of money, doubling down would eventually break everyone even. But nobody seems to have that infinite amount of money. And so when we're taking what seems like unlimited attention and spending it all in intoxication of thoughts, we're asking ourselves not to pay attention actively, proactively, to what's going on, so that we can justify continuing to do the wrong thing. And I would say that that pattern is worth contesting. And that pattern is worth challenging. And that pattern is worth interrupting. And the interruption itself and the upset that comes out of it is a sure sign that people feel there's great security in maintaining things that are causing the insecurity that they're fighting to overcome. And that's a sickness. That, I would say, is a mentally ill thought, in the sense that it's not well, because there's no hope in that at all. There's no hope that love is going to remove from me something that love had nothing to do with creating, when the creation is all in my own thoughts and my own freedom to have those thoughts. And so even the depression is a choice. And it's such a sick choice that I react to the reaction and keep maintaining the thoughts moment to moment to moment, rather than realizing that peace does not require me to maintain those thoughts. Only my own reactive focus on my own reactive thoughts that are irrational trigger that. And it's my own right now thoughts that they're stuck, they're somewhere else, they're happening elsewhere, that keeps me maintaining them, because I use those excuses to make believe that truth will someday come, because it must not be here now.
Well, again, I don't agree with the concept of right and wrong, but I think if I take it into the context of working and not working, the reason people aren't willing is because they're still convinced that whatever lies or
But what about you?
stories they're maintaining work.
What about you compared to people? Since we're here, and it's easy for us to surmise what other people are doing, if we're doing it, we might be better samples of the conversation.
Well, I think, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. For me, I maintain the stories that I'm still convinced work.
Yes. And do they?
Obviously, eventually I get humbled to the point that I realize that they don't.
Do they work?
No, they
Okay.
They work,
So
but momentarily.
It's like an immediate intoxication of taking a drink when you know that it's going to lead to 60 other drinks and other drugs. And it gives you the impression it's working because there's a momentary relief of satisfaction, just like denial provides. It's the exact same thing. Denial gives us, if we're not looking, it's not there. Now, come on. Any kid would know better than to think if you put something behind a chair, it's no longer there, right? They pretty much know if you put the present there, it's there. It's not hidden. We know it, and we act like we don't. And we wait till that time that pain finally gets so bad where we admit it as though we didn't know all along, to justify continuing to maintain the idea that someday, somehow a lie will become true because we've maintained it for so long. And what does it do? Wear our asses out in every respect. And all of those indications along the way need to be defended against to make believe they're not there by the same denial that started with the thought initially. Mm-hmm. And that's the chronic nature of mentally obsessive thinking. And talking about it isn't always easy, because what comes up are all the ideas that would counter simply admitting we're exactly where we are with everything we have, always, always, always. And anytime I think I need to get somewhere else or get something else to fulfill myself, I'm just maintaining a thought that I'm not here. The opposite of that is I'm not here and I don't have anything. Why would I feel less than? Why wouldn't I feel less than? That's an accurate assessment of what I'm thinking, not who I am, only what I'm doing in thought, only what I'm choosing to do with thought. You know, it's like putting my hand in a fire. If I think life is about trying to put my hand in a fire and not burn, I'm missing the point. Fire is very helpful, but overuse of it is not that helpful if I immerse myself in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to immerse myself in chronic thoughts that are lies is to make believe that insanity is normal, insanity is hard to get to, and reason is just so difficult. And then ask my irrational thinking to figure out why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm going to get irrational thoughts that are going to cause doubt in me and reinforce the doubt I already have. And I keep thinking more of them is going to get me better. And that's just a sick way to approach my experience. And I would say it's a sickness. It's a reaction to a reaction to a reaction to a reaction when we're absolutely free, wherever we are, not to repeat it, always, regardless of what we think.
I think part of having this conversation is getting that out there so
Yes.
people start to listen.
Yes.
And also, I think,
well, you and I, how about that?
Yeah, you and I, we hear it. I do think people, and including myself, get convinced.
Stick with you.
Even I get convinced because I think or I believe it's working for other people, or I believe it's working for
very good
other people in society. They're getting away with being, I don't know. I don't want to egotastic, you know, their egos being glorified and they're getting everything that I believe I want on the outside, the house in the hills, the vacations in the south of France, the cars, the notoriety, all the stuff that I want, they're getting. So why shouldn't I try to glorify my ego just as well if that's the path to get it? However, from my experience in my B career, because what ends up happening is, you know, I end up working with those individuals when they've crashed and burned and they've gotten everything and they've turned to drugs and alcohol and they're on their last legs and they realize that even everything that they've gotten, it still hasn't satisfied or changed how they feel internally, and they don't feel whole and complete. Well, and they're trying to find a different road. And in the end of the day, they end up leading exactly where we're having this depth of conversation, which is like the only thing that can satisfy and make you whole and complete is something, in my opinion, that's permanent. And the only thing that's permanent on this whole planet, in this whole universe, as you call it, is the absolute. Other people call it God, Jesus, Muhammad, Rinpoche, whatever it is. But whatever that is the only thing that's going to still be here when, you know, everything is gone on this planet. So it's the only thing that can anchor you, that will make you whole and complete.
So in your understanding of that, last week you asked the question, how can I get back to it?
Yes. Which
I would say reveals the idea that you can get away from it. And as you just described it, it's not something you can or anyone can ever get away from.
You can only think you can.
Beautiful. So when you think you need to get back to it, you're really asking yourself why you're continuing to do things that give you the impression that you're away from it in your thinking. That's all. It isn't that you're away from it. It isn't that you're disconnected from it. It's that you have thoughts that are disconnected. And what are they disconnected from? Reality. They have no substance in reality because lies have no basis. And yet it's so built into our discussion that we repeat those stories in ways that give us the impression that the idea we're not there has nothing to do with what we're doing and everything to do with what everyone else is doing. And it's very interesting how quick we are to blame people for our conditions very often, especially when we're acting the victim. and at the same time, them use them as you're describing to justify us continuing to do what's wrong. They got that by egotistic, aggressive, whatever, however we see it, that they think they got it, that we think we need to emulate, that's wrong, is the exact same thing. We use everyone else as an excuse while we overlook our own impact on our own experience. And not only our own experience in terms of what we're feeling, but on our own experience in terms of what we're doing and how productive we are in the world and how able we are to manifest the greatness that is our nature so that everyone benefits, rather than make believe the best thing we can do is the thing that serves the self that doesn't even exist other than what we think about ourselves, and wonder why it's never enough. And we always seem to need to get somewhere else and have something else to fulfill it. And it never seems fulfilling when we get it, but we don't want to clue in on the fact that we keep repeating this thing and it's a disease. It's a blindness that we want to make believe we don't know any better than. And we absolutely know better if we're reacting and we're living in a state of desperation and a state of anxiety and stress and reactiveness. Those you talked last week about dreaming about somebody and realized you had thoughts about them that were not in line with forgiveness. Remember? Mm-hmm. And I would suggest that you have thoughts of them during your awakened period, not just when you're dreaming, that are contemptible, that you're still entertaining those thoughts in your daydreaming about them, but it's subtle enough that it doesn't seem as bad as they were when you originally really hated them or thought that they were really the villains in your world. But they're still there in ways that think of them as less than who you are ultimately as an ideal being rather than who you think you are. Those thoughts pass through our head, and they're all indications we know better because we're struggling with them and we're holding others in contempt when in fact they have the exact same state and nature that we do.
And I think this next thought I'm going to say is going to really bring it into the present, is the more and more you hold on to it, the more and more it continues to manifest in your experience of reality in your life.
Well, you think it's real, but it isn't. That's the whole point. That's what delusion is making believe it becomes real because you continue to manifest it. And the whole hope and vain hope and the whole addiction is to the idea someday it will be true. A lie's never going to be true, ever.
Yeah.
So it can't be true now. And when you say bring it into the present, you suggest when you're not thinking of things happening that you're not in the present. We're always in the present.
Well, you're thinking that thought in the present.
Yes, exactly. And what are you thinking about?
Whatever that is in the contents of that thought.
Yeah, right. Pretty much what isn't happening.
Yes.
It's never what's happening because what's happening doesn't need any thought if we're observing it. It's fulfilling on its own. Mm-hmm. If we're quiet and just look, everything's doing what it's doing. And it's kind of fascinating to be in the face of that and begin to have the adventure of saying, wow, it's all happening right now. And it doesn't matter what I think. And all of a sudden thinking takes its proper place, which is helping us to function when we make choices rather than dysfunction and think that we're someday going to get the dysfunction right. So we always meet people where they are, referencing an earlier comment. You know, you said we have to meet people where they are. We always meet them where they are. We just don't always find them in the condition we expect. And so we're sometimes surprised that they're not where we thought they would be. And so as a result, don't think we're meeting them where they are when we're always meeting them where they are. We speak in terms that show this underlying reliance on thought as being our source, rather the underlying truth and reality always being our source, regardless of what we think. And so our discussion, and I've had it with you, I mean, you've been as able-bodied and willing as anybody I've ever worked with, Philip, to look at this stuff and to concede it and sit still in the face of the things that can seem to be really justify reaction and defense, and just sit with it, which we've done, I think, since we started, where we just take time out and say, just, you know, you used to say, I think I have enough. And you'd go contemplate it, and we'd get back together a couple of days later and start to kind of pick up, rather than get angry, dismissive, run away, claim that I'm some sort of onerous individual that's attacking you. It's been a collaborative. And to feel attacked by anyone is to admit I'm defensive. To feel offended by anyone is to admit I'm defensive. To feel insulted by anyone is to admit I am defensive. All I'm doing is I'm only insulted by what I'm thinking. I'm only defensive by contrary thought when I think my thoughts are true and real. And the only reason I'm defensive is because they're not true or real. Period. Always. Now. Exactly what I'm doing now is what perpetuates that. And those thoughts we have about them being elsewhere and they're trapped and they're stuck and all that stuff only reinforces that they are. So our body suffers the things that would indicate we're right. And suffering is not an indication of rightness. It's an indication of wrongness.
Well, I think for me, the reason I have that willingness and understanding is because I've been trained at a very high level as an actor, and our job is to go into the conflict and understand the conflict and get into the grittiness of whatever is going on. I don't think everybody has that training or willingness to go into the pain and the suffering and try to get to the other side of it.
So you think nature would need an education?
I think with nature
to accomplish this.
Well, look, again, it's a retraining. We had all this stuff, or not that we have all this stuff, but we got trained from a very early time, childhood, school, the outside world, all this stuff. So we kind of learned to disconnect from this thing that's always a part of us. And so we get lost.
Did we?
Did we?
Yeah. Ever disconnect?
No, we never did. That's the point. So but we start to think everything that we taught, the thought-driven world is what is when it's not. It's just a construction that's an agreement among people of how people have agreed that things are.
So we agreed lies were true.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's what we do in the present, even in thinking about it as something we did in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So we think about the past in the present only, ever. There is no past that actually exists other than in thought. Animals don't, there's no storage data of all that stuff. There's memory.
Yeah. I mean,
always.
They have, I mean, animals have triggers too. I mean, I can just think of my dog. She was a beautiful red border collie. Unfortunately, her name was Corona after the beer and this. After everything that's happened, it's a little bit different. But, you know, when she was a puppy, she had a gardener who would she would bark and the guy would blow, what's it called? The leaf blower in her face in the kennel. So every time a gardener would come by, she had that memory and she bit a couple gardeners on their ass.
Yeah. So it's memory.
So it's memory.
In the present.
In the present.
Right. It's a reinterpretation of something no longer happening that I would suggest very often isn't really what happened, but it's what serves the point of our present to justify what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And as humans, not being animals, or maybe being built on a platform that's an animal, but also given a chance to choose, and we keep choosing to maintain the ideas about how things are wrong as the source of thinking someday they'll be right, that would be a pretty sick mode of operating.
Mm-hmm.
So dysfunction would naturally be common, and lack would naturally seem normal after a while. And disease, as it's become, seems more normal than healing, when in fact our bodies are designed to maintain balance. And disease is an act of imbalance, not balance.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I wanted to bring in the conversation, I just been reading this book, or listening, because it's better for me to listen sometimes to books on tape. It's called A Happy Pocket Full of Money, Your Quantum Leap into the Understanding, Having, and Enjoying of Immense Wealth and Happiness. This guy, David Cameron, I can't pronounce the last name, Gikandi. And the only reason I'm bringing it up was, you know, he talks about quantum physics in a way where it's very much in line with this conversation of how we kind of manifest our thoughts and they end up because we are bringing them into the present, we end up giving meaning behind them, and that ends up shaping our understanding of our life. There's this one part where, he talks about, and I think we're kind of getting at the same thing about, obviously, life in a certain degree is an illusion. This physical plane is an illusion. But he says the best thing to do when you're trying to is have 5,000 goals that you want to manifest, 5,000 goals, and fill yourself with the images and the thoughts and all that stuff. And I'm just doing this as an exercise. Yesterday I sat down and, I'm overlooking the ocean, and I'm just putting every single goal, everything that I can think of. He said, because eventually, if you have 100 to 5,000 different goals or whatever you want to manifest, eventually your brain is eventually some of those are going to come true in your reality, because that's what you're thinking about. So putting the focus on that. So I think for me, when it comes to this conversation, what we're talking about is people are putting so much focus on the past transgressions and what they think or could happen or what happened. And then they're personally attaching to those things. And then it keeps happening again. So then they're justifying why their life is stuck and why they don't want to grow, or because they don't think it's possible.
Do you think it's impossible?
What?
To do what you're describing them as not able to do.
Do I think it's impossible? No, it's not impossible. It's just, it takes a lot of swallowing of pride.
I would say if you're not creating pride to overcome and inflate ideas that are not true, there's nothing to swallow. If I'm coming at it with a throat full of that everything's stuck in my throat because it's not designed, it's not food for thought, because it's not nutritionist. There's no nutrition in it. There's no value in it. There's no pride in letting things be what they are. There's no pride in how things are right now. It's all in thought.
Mm-hmm.
So the point I'm making is that if you're seeing it clearly in what others are doing, you're doing it. To the degree that you see it, you're doing it. And to the degree that you use them to excuse it, you're probably not looking at something accurately that you're actively doing. And if you're trying to manifest and need to come up with 5,000 things and goals to manifest in your brain, you're trying to overcome the hundreds of thousands of other things you're doing in your brain that you're manifesting, that are depressing and that are scarce and that are creating depression and scarcity as a result. So this whole idea of bringing balance all the time, nobody ever comes to me and says, I need more innocence and I need more negative thoughts. Everybody's always looking to be more positive and feel better. Why would that be if what we're doing below the surface of what we think we're doing was good? And I would say that core is what this disease is about. And beginning simply to admit what we can know now, which is something's wrong. To say, if I'm doing it, I don't need to understand it, because if I'm asking understanding to figure it out, I'm asking a rational thought that I'm already relying on in ways that are irrational to give me an answer. And what am I going to do? I'm going to go on a search forever to try to find that place I've always been in, but have been unwilling to admit. And so the potential is trillions of things that could happen in terms of the interaction of humans to be better. And one of Pedro's questions last week was his parting question, let me pull it up really quick, was how do our lives impact each of us in the world and in general? And I would say all corruption, all pollution, all contamination, all violence is all a reflection of those kind of thoughts. And it isn't to say things don't exist naturally that are toxic, but if we've created it, that's what I would rather focus on than talk about excusing it by saying, well, there's acids and geysers and there are things that are toxic that come out of volcanoes, and try to blame nature for it rather than recognize what we've done ourselves is toxic when it's reliant on toxic thought. And it's going to be toxic. And intoxication contains the word toxic for good reason. So there's lots of ways to try to balance this. But if the balance, it's worth noting, is always trying to bring balance to imbalance. The real question is, why are we always imbalanced to make believe disease is normal enough to consider it just a fact of life, rather than see that health is actually the design that the body is capable of doing? But when we put it under the kind of stress that we impose on it by making believe a lie can be true, it starts backfiring in ways because it does not know how to handle the stress we're giving it. It's not designed. It's designed to break down in the face of that, just like a car would break down if you didn't put oil in it. Mm-hmm. It's part of its design. It's not some strange coincidence. We're not condemned to it. It's not a curse. This is a choice. It's a free choice we make to continue. And if we're free to continue, we're also as free to stop. And isn't it interesting how many stories we tell to justify the continuation of it, and how other people can't do it because of this, that, and the other thing? And that would be to consider them somewhat distinct from us if we've recognized that we're capable of doing it, and forget that they are too, and start to see them in that light rather than the light that imposes on them the same limitations of our own thinking, imagining they're somewhat distinct from us and we're better than they are. In an infinite source or an absolute source, however you define it or name it, there is no distinctions. There is no discrimination. There's no divisibility. It's indivisible, absolute. It's equitable for all in the exact same way. There's none of the things that humans fight over in that. All of our fighting comes from thoughts. And if the basis of our knowing present is present wherever we are, and we are constantly distracting ourselves from it, because it would divulge the fact that who we think we are is not who we are at all. And to face that would face all the fears associated that we've accumulated in our body. And we think the best thing we can do is keep running from it, is instead of finally facing it. There's nowhere to run when you take what's happening with you. It ends up there anyhow. What's wrong in the beginning ends up wrong later when it's finally looked at. We know it the whole time. We just aren't, we've mastered the art of getting to the point where it hurts so bad, we finally admit it, rather than beginning to see, I know the discomfort immediately. I know the awkwardness of it immediately. I question what I'm doing immediately. And yet I continue to launch those ships in a direction thinking I'm going to win the battle. Often. So the insight here isn't so much we shouldn't do it and can't do it. The insight is we absolutely can do it, and we absolutely are doing it to the degree that we're entertaining and experiencing ideas about others that are less than who they actually are in favor of who we think they are. And that's one way of beginning to just sit on it and say, wow, I hold people in a lot of contempt. I'm very petty about what other people are doing. I don't see them in the light of who they are. I see them in the light of what they do, and there's a lot of it I don't like. And that would say that I'm more reliant on my thinking about them than I am my awareness of them in an absolute state, which I am always aware of. If it exists, I'm always aware of it, just like everyone's always aware of it. I'm just helping them react by being reactive with them, and helping instigate the proof I seem to need to continue doing the wrong thing, to justify it by saying, well, they're doing it. Everybody else is doing it. Why shouldn't I? That's like getting on a plane that's going to crash and say, well, they're all going. None of us would do that in our right minds, but in our wrong minds, we think that's the only thing to do. And that's the sickness of the mental obsession. That's the sickness of the disease that leads to all the fractured states of mind. Seeming fractured states, I would mention, because they're all just opinions being perpetuated by constantly being maintained as an excuse to justify not admitting what we absolutely know.
Well, isn't what we're talking about kind of about the duality of our existence, which, you know, the human and the being part? The beingness is the absolute. It's a part of our internal nature. It's always there. Yes. The humanness is the thought and getting lost in the thought and the justification, all that stuff. And eventually we get to a point where we get humbled to the beingness.
Well, but to think of it only happening when we finally come around to it in thought, once again, creates the idea that thought is superior to that absolute state. And well, it shows, though, how reliant on it we are, Philip. Yeah. We're reliant on these stories to kind of justify that we think we're not there when we think we're not there. And when you talk about lost thought, we don't feel lost in thought. When we're thinking thoughts that are lost, we feel lost.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Our feelings are largely a reflection of what we're thinking. And when we're preoccupied by the intoxication of obsessive thoughts, largely we're feeling that while knowing better.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't know what's wrong if we didn't know better. Wrong would seem right. And the thing we try to get by going somewhere else and having something else would be our present state of awareness. Wrong would become right. And we would say, I am the creator of rightness. I am the creator of truth. I am the creator of reality. Everyone follow me. And the fact is, if reality and truth are real and true, be real and true for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Hawking said that in an infinite universe, everybody's at the center. And the difference with self-centered ideas where I'm at the center and nobody else is a big difference than recognizing everybody's there and starting to see that as an actual state of being while we're dealing in what seems like a duality of parts and pieces. And the mistake of looking at things as separate is to think that things can only be good and not know that they're absolutely connected through common ground and varying degrees to what is bad. If things are up, it means there's something down. They're not up. Nothing sitting on the ground would be considered up to somebody, but if it was floating 30 feet up, it would seem like it relative to where it was in the ground. So missing the absolute nature of everything is starting to think of things as separate rather than think of them as whole. And that's exactly the thinking that has us think that the absolute nature of things isn't there when we don't think it's there. We think we can be separate, which is a lie. We're absolutely always connected, because there is no disconnection in it. There is no potential for disconnection. It's an absolute state of being that doesn't function in space and time.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't a dimensional thing. It isn't here now and not then. It isn't for me and not them. It's always ever present. That is a little confounding to a brain that's designed to deal in functional relative terms. And yet, my sense is that's only thought to be the case because our brain has done so little to express the fullness of that greatness that we're absolutely always connected to. Human history has been littered by this obsessive, compulsive need to fight and dominate and overcome and overwhelm. And I wouldn't say that that's based on strength. I would say it's based on weakness and vulnerability appearing to look strong. That's all. And so great kingdoms that have come have fallen, the greatest. And they'll continue to when it's based on thought that's not true and real.
Yeah.
There's no division in an absolute nature. So divisiveness by its nature is something born in thought, not reality and truth. So if we're indivisible by nature and we start operating on the basis of what we do affects and impacts everyone, to Pedro's point, how do our lives impact each of us in the world in general? Everything I do that's wrong impacts everything.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that it changes reality. It just simply means that it instigates the potential for reactivity in others when I'm acting reactively. And when I'm responsive and considerate, I remove myself from that grid of anxiety and relieve everybody else. When I get better, everybody else gets better. Because we're not detached or disconnected as we feel when we're thinking thoughts that have no basis or substance. We're simply thinking things that have no basis or substance and wonder why we are struggling with reality and truth. That's a big leap to claim reality and truth are in question when we happen to be thinking things that have no basis.
You know that saying, or it's actually, in my opinion, it's funny. It's kind of a joke where they talk about, where, what was it? Where God is hidden itself.
What's that?
Do you know where God is hidden itself?
Nowhere.
No, inside of every single human being.
Well, and that thought, think of that. Could an infinite source be hidden? And could it
No.
only be in us? That's self-centered to think it's in us and it's buried in us and it's deep in us. And think of the idea of truth being deep. Truth's not deep. It's superficial and accessible wherever we are. It's the nature of our existence. How could it be deep? It's what's empowering the entire universe in whatever way it's empowering it. And you pointed to the fact that this doctor who wrote that book, or whoever the guy that wrote the book that has a last name that's hard to pronounce, talked about it being an illusion. Our eyes are designed to see what our eyes are designed to see. The world doesn't look the way we think it looks. The world looks the way we think it looks because our eyes see what they're designed to see. Snakes don't see the way we do. They see thermal imaging. They see life as heat, and they know that that's something they want to eat. So they go get it. They don't see it as a rabbit and all that. They don't think of it in those terms. So we are designed in our body, and yet we have insight and vision that transcends the body. The Netflix show that everyone in the weekly meeting was watching about life after death, I think, many of those people were not in their bodies when they were witnessing their bodies dead during surgeries and other 30 minutes. One woman was underwater for 30 minutes, witnessed the whole experience and clearly had sight and vision, but her eyes weren't where she was seeing from. She had a sense of knowing. If those things can be realized in the most extreme cases, isn't that the same thing as how far we seem to need to go in pain to finally concede the humility and the pride that we've been using to justify the extent we go to finally fall? Isn't that the exact same thing? That we think we need to get somewhere horrible before we finally concede it, rather than say, wait a minute, that thing is with us the whole time. This is our state of awareness. Our state of awareness is not limited to our eyeballs and our ears and our bodily senses. Our state of awareness transcends that and has great vision and great foresight and intuition, because it's not thinking, it's knowing, it's absolute, it's present. It isn't somewhere else and with somebody else. And it isn't for someone and not someone else. It's ours, all of ours, everything and everyone, everywhere, now. And watching our words as we talk about is starting to see how we speak in terms that serve the thoughts we have rather than the absolute state of our nature. And in doing that, we continue to perpetuate this mythology. So my sense is part of the discussion is to interrupt that and start to notice the reactions that people get when they're interrupted, that they don't like, because they're not able to confirm the thought they have by thinking that if everybody hears it the way they think it is, they've made their point. When most of us look bewildered as to what people are talking about when they go on and tell stories that none of us ever witnessed before. It's very hard to follow the details of a story being told that somebody else experienced and then made up or made something out of to justify what they're doing. It's just a lot of information that seems to have no basis because it has no basis.
Well, two things you brought up, that particular Netflix thing. I think one of the things that, at least I can say that I'm scared of contemplating or going into is, and when you talked about death and seeing through not your eyes, but through something else, there's a certain charge for me thinking about death that I'm not willing to maybe sit with right now.
You know why?
No, I don't. I don't know right now on the tip of my thoughts.
Exactly. It's not death we're afraid of. Death is natural. It's an absolute part of our process. We're not afraid of it. Mm-hmm. Nobody who has done it yet has failed. So when we look for perfection, that's one thing we can be pretty assured we're going to do perfectly. So my sense is, my experience is, what I was always afraid of was letting go of the thought right now. And the death of that thought is the beginning of allowing the ego to die, because what I've given it is a sense of life because it exists on the same basis that a lie does. My defense of it has been what I've been maintaining. And the fear I have of death is the fear of letting go of something that never had any life, other than my constant chronic thinking. And if I think my thinking is the source of my existence, why wouldn't I be afraid? Because it's not true. I'm living an entire life making believe that thought is my core source. And if that thought is sick, I'm expressing things sickly, and I'm sick over what I'm expressing, and thinking the world is imperfect when the world is doing everything that it's doing right now perfectly. It isn't imperfect. If you compare something to itself, it's never imperfect. It's a perfect comparison. But when you compare anything to anything else, it's always imperfect in some way because it won't have the same attributes of the thing compared to. That's something we can induce as an opinion, but it isn't true. It's just a way of seeing things. My sense is that's what lack of forgiveness is. When I see somebody for what I think they did, I'm seeing what I think about what they did as the source of my relationship to them, not actually the fact that what they did isn't even going on anymore except in my own thinking. What I resent and don't forgive is my willingness to continue to entertain thoughts that don't about things that aren't even happening and making believe that they're all that's happening. Because resentments tend to brew in our psyche. They tend to be repeated and repeated and repeated. And if I don't repeat it, I don't have that connection with that other person. Mm-hmm. It's disconnected because it isn't even happening. It's being maintained by my own opinion. So my sense is the real fear is not in the future, it's in the present, because there is no future, because when it occurs, it'll be present. And we tend to know exactly what to do in the future that we always worry about once we're there. We tend to have a very good idea of what to do because we always do whatever we do with certainty, rather than think we need to do it a certain way and expect it to happen that way. And when it's not going the way we thought it should, we feel afraid and everything else. All we're afraid of is our sole reliance on fear. And we know well enough to be afraid when we're relying on it because it's untrue and inaccurate and dysfunctional. And the fear is actually an accurate representation that we know better.
So one thing that I noticed, I have this certain, I talk about it, the B career that I do. There's a certain part of me that knows it's not what I want to do long term. And I remember while I was on this last thing that I was doing, there was a part of me internally that felt like if I dealt with my feelings, I would start to move towards closing that particular work session that I was doing. And, I got eventually it got to the point where I needed to do that. And, I got a couple of therapists that I talked to, and it started to move towards me disengaging with that particular work session and moving towards what this next transition in my life currently is. And it's funny, what occurred to me, this thing that I don't wish on anyone happened. It occurred after, in December, it occurred after I had done these 2 sessions of, I like Kundalini yoga. It's something I enjoy doing. And there's a particular prosperity meditation, and you would wake up at 5:30 and do it. And after doing it for 2 days, this particular event occurred. Then I think it was this week, I listened to some, Kundalini music, and I was getting to a dead end with the people that were helping me in law enforcement. And finally, the truth of what was going on in that particular reality came to the forefront after listening to this Kundalini music the night before. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there's a part of me that's contemplating, well, is my ability to let go of whatever my current thoughts are. And for me, when I practice Kundalini or anything, it's like me choosing to go with the truth or the absolute and allow it to dictate and lead me. But I've been scared to kind of practice it a little bit more because every time I do it, something of consequence happens. And I guess my question is, have you ever experienced things like that in your own life, or what what do you think those type of things mean? Because I'm sure the listeners, they've always had those things where it's like things that are happening that are bad are happening, but there's a certain part of it underneath it that you suspect is probably good for you in the long term.
Isn't a lie always imagining that someday it will be true? Isn't the addict always thinking that what they're doing in the present is going to save them?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the lie of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, if the seed is corrupt and what we're managing by doing things to feel better is that we're maintaining that thing that we're claiming to want to get away from. We're actually creating the thing by denying it and ignoring it and pretending it isn't there. And these things, I would suggest, and this could be a stretch, but if you simply consider things that seem to be impossible to understand, hard to comprehend, overwhelming, just consider them. You'll start noticing that you have a greater sense of awareness than your understanding and thinking will admit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the points is that if we're doing what we're doing and not thinking that we're doing it, what we call subconscious, we're aware of a subconscious enough to even name it. It must be an indication we're aware of it. And if we're constantly trying to get over it by being grateful, by thinking about things we really want to do, by trying to put an end to things we seem to be stuck in, and on the way toward those things, keep finding these things that come up that are wonky and troublesome and difficult, isn't it maybe an indication that we're heading in a direction that we're aware of is wrong while we're trying to maintain the actual wrong that we're denying we're doing? And that's actually the mental obsession. That's actually the disease. Mm-hmm. This idea that we're not doing what we're doing because we don't think we're doing what we're doing, and we rely solely on the thinking that always, by the way, happens to be what we think we're thinking, because it's always in a language. And if you notice, what you're thinking is always translated into a language. This would suggest that there's another form of language. Somebody said yesterday in the weekly conversation, it sounds like Chinese to me. I said, good. You're starting to actually witness the space beyond your understanding. If I was listening to Chinese, I would say, it sounds like Chinese.
Well, you'd say it's Mandarin or Cantonese.
If I knew the difference, I'd have to know the language, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even know to that. All I would have to associate to is the person's Chinese, and I'm figuring they're speaking Chinese, and certainly I don't understand it. And when I'm doing things in my own experience that I want to disclaim responsibility for, I act like I don't understand it. And I act again like understanding is the sum total of my existence, because thinking understands, but knowing knows. Knowing doesn't think. Knowing is an ever-present state of knowing. It doesn't think. It doesn't have anything to think about. It doesn't have a self to think about because it doesn't think of itself. It's just a state of being. It is, in fact, what we call intuition, but intuition to knowing isn't intuitive. It's just knowing. It's just all knowing. So if I'm doing the thing that's giving me the impression that I'm not doing it, that underlying issue is the one I'm not looking at when I constantly look at what I'm doing and try to balance it and try to bring some centeredness to it, and not notice that what is it that I'm always out of balance? Why do I always feel out of balance? Why do I always feel off center? What is it I'm doing that's giving me that impression that I constantly need to overcome it and fix it and get better and get more? What is it that's doing that? And I would suggest it's thinking that we're not thinking what we're thinking. And if you simply concede that, sort of like if you feel wrong and simply concede you're thinking wrong, and start living with the fact that you're thinking wrong, your awareness of what's wrong will grow, rather than asking immediately the wrong thought to answer why it's wrong when it's irrational, and all you're going to get is irrational conclusions and more doubt from that search. Just say, I'm feeling wrong, I'm thinking wrong. I'm feeling bad, I'm thinking bad. I'm not bad, I'm just misusing my thinking capacity to the degree that it's wrong. But the beauty of it is the fact that I feel wrong is an indication that I know better, because my body's actually telling me what I'm up to. I'm actually getting a sensation that's telling me it's happening now. What you're doing now is wrong. Period. Over. Done. Free. Not, oh, I've been doing this so long and I start telling the story about all the reasons because I'm so good at mastering this whole complexity of making believe that thought's going to save me, and I launch back into it rather than concede it and just say, I'm always aware. We can't not be aware if there's an absolute source. And as you named all those different things in the big book, Bill uses absolute, unlimited, infinite, omnipotent, and all powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And doesn't name them because my sense is historically humans have fought over the name.
Yeah.
The thought of it rather than it. There is no fight in an indivisible source. None. There never has been. That's all human endeavor. And if we can create the conflict in ourselves that we feel occasionally would be worth killing ourselves over, and compulsions are all a slow form of suicide because none of them are healthy. Eating is a good example of it today. Obesity isn't a function of overeating. It's a function of eating food, in my estimation, that has no value, no nutritional value. So what does the body say? Thank you, but I need more, because what is it looking for? Nutrition. Not to be full, not to have taste fill my stomach, but nutrition. What does it need? Vitamins, minerals, water, healthy water. When we're not drinking those things, our body's going to say, give me more, I need more. If we're drinking poisoned water or salt water, it's not going to satisfy the thirst. And drinking salt water is a guarantee your body's going to ask for more because it's not satisfying the need that it's there to do, designed. It's the same thing with empty thoughts. What is grandiosity but a form of obesity? Pride, form of obesity. Arrogance, a form of obesity of thought. All of a sudden, I'm bigger because I think I need to be bigger because I know that what I'm thinking has no basis. So I got to act proud, act arrogant. When I start doing that chronically, I'm bound to do things that are wrong in the name of being right because I'm getting more and more. And look at me. But it's based on a corrupt seed. And that corrupt seed will go with it wherever it goes. And eventually it will collapse. Because it's not true to begin with. It's not even, doesn't really even exist except to the fancy of appearance.
So two things. While you were talking, I have a certain mythology that I'm the only one that's holding myself back in majority of my life, or that I never get to have my cake and eat it too, or I'll never get what I want, blah, blah, blah. And when you were talking about I'm thinking bad or I'm feeling bad, that means I'm thinking bad. So I'm holding myself back because I'm thinking thoughts that are holding myself back. And I'm not getting what I want because I'm thinking thoughts that I'm not going to get what I want. And that's basically what you're saying.
But you're fulfilled with those thoughts because you're getting exactly what you want in those thoughts.
Yeah.
This is the sickness, is starting to see that if we've been depressed, we want the depression to justify our own denial of what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty sick. We're not doing it. We claim to be blind because it would be unreasonable and insane to want to do this on purpose. And yet we do it on purpose, claiming we're not doing it, which is exactly why we keep this subconscious there to claim it's happening to me rather than actually being caused by me. It's just another excuse.
And I suspect the reason, at least for me personally, that I hold those thoughts is to really fly or be free. I would have to let go of those thoughts, and I couldn't necessarily control the results of what happened.
Philip, if you're hanging on to something that has no basis, you're only hanging on to a thought that it has basis right now. That's all.
Okay.
There's nothing. And if you're afraid of not getting what you want, think of this. You're afraid of not getting the little things you want while you're making believe you don't have all that you have when you already have everything.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you be afraid of not getting what you want? I would think not getting what I wanted would be a big bonus to come to terms with the fact that I've already got it all. The denial wants to continue to deny and justify it by creating all these imageries that basically serve the idea of repeating the thought that's not true.
Mm.
And if we think, you said, how do I get back to the absolute? If I think I'm not where I am right now, and where I am is always where I am, what are the chances that thinking's ever going to get me anywhere that's satisfying or get me to have anything that's satisfying? There is no chance. I haven't even accepted that in the present, where I am, I haven't accepted in thinking while I have been in the present where I am with everything that is, including you and I and everyone else right now, and I'm making believe it's somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a chance to make believe that self-serving interests are somehow going to serve that self. And you know what that self is? Imagine that self you think you're going to get somewhere is just a bunch of ideas you have about who you think you are. It isn't who you are. And if they've been based on the idea that you only become somebody by having certain things, then you're working off of ideas that aren't true and have been never been true, and they're not going to be true. And for you not to for you to achieve those things would suggest that it's natural to base life on what isn't true, rather than start to see that it's very hard to get there if you're already there. It's very hard to leave where you are when where you are is where you are and make believe you'll get there. And make believe you're going to face anything other than consequences that are completely distraught, that are filled with distraught and a sense of uselessness and a sense of disconnect and all that. And interestingly, we have accurate senses about what we're doing, and then what we try to do is get over the feelings we're having about being disconnected, rather than notice the feelings are accurate reflections of the thought that we're promoting.
Mm.
And to try to get away from the feeling is to try to pretend that it's not the thought. And once more, continue the mentally obsessive addiction to this idea that somehow our truth is going to be realized, when in fact it's always put us in contest and conflict with everything around us. And if that isn't enough evidence, you can see the sickness of making believe we're not even doing what we're doing, and how pervasive it is to make believe that the history that we've experienced that's never been able to succeed will someday succeed. Mm-hmm. It's the source of why addiction is never enough. It's the thinking that isn't enough because it has no basis. There is nothing to a lie other than our own concept of thinking it can someday be true. Even in the idea that someday it will be true, we're admitting today that it's not. And where is truth? Here, now. What are we admitting? The actual fact. What are we thinking? Someday, somewhere else, by the way, never here now, because wherever that future is, we'll be here and now when we come there, and we'll be promoting the same idea to make believe it's somewhere else. So how can we ever get there, and how can we ever have it? And if we did get it and have it temporarily because it looked like we got the thing, we got the Ferrari, we got the girl, we got the this, we got the that, it wouldn't last, because very quickly we'd realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it would be, because it isn't fulfilling.
We have a prime example of that on our weekly conversations.
Yeah, people who have everything and wonder how much more they can get. But that's an emptiness in thought only.
Yeah.
And people will go as far as they want and as far as they need to. And the fact is, we are each choosing that every day. And I choose it to the degree I see it in others and not think of it as something I'm actually complimenting them and doing. Mm. So this discussion to me is more life and death over the life and death of thoughts that aren't true than it is over the life and death of a body. But bodies become susceptible to this thinking through addiction and suicide, because it becomes one day we just say, oh, there's no point. There's no fucking point. And the fact is, that's an accurate assessment. We haven't been making a point the whole time. We've been arguing to try to make a point that makes no point. There is no point to it.
Well, that reminds me of a lot of the Satori moments I've had, at least in the last 6 years.
What are those?
Huh?
What are those?
Aha moments. Realizations.
Yeah.
Almost of the visceral, profound type. Like,
yes.
I remember when my dad passed away, and there was a lot of stuff that was left monetarily in the negative for me, and there was a part of me that wanted to jump in the Hudson River in the dead of winter. And I got to the river and I realized it wasn't that I wanted to actually kill myself. It was that I just didn't want to feel like I wanted to kill myself. And, that through therapy and all that stuff, working through all that, got through that. and even of late, the realization that's happened to me lately is, there's a part of me when my dad passed away, I thought, well, acting is not going to take care of me, So I need to figure out how I can take care of myself. And for me, it was this manifestation of a B career. And then it was, while I was in that B career, and continue somewhat today, is me thinking, if I have this certain amount of money put away, stocked away, then I can come back and really focus on my acting. And then I realized, with everything that's happened in the last few months, that, well, that was a fallacy as well, because, I should just focus on what I want to focus on, because that's the only thing that's going to move the needle forward to what I actually want to be doing on a daily basis. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's better to just do it.
Well, it may even be better to admit you're already doing it. You just don't like the consequences because you keep imagining they'll be different than what they are. You keep imagining that false ideals will be true. You keep imagining expectations are your guide because they're all born in thought. And this really applies to everyone everywhere, not just me, not just you. If we're sharing something in common that's absolute, we're also sharing in common what we do wrong and make believe it's different because of the people, places, times, and ways that we see it, right? And those aha moments you're talking about is our natural state of awareness that eventually and occasionally comes through the preoccupation of our thought, despite our fight to maintain that thought and block it. Because to block it is to maintain the idea that we're in charge. And all we're doing is preoccupying we're intoxicated, literally intoxicated, toxic thought. We're intoxicated with toxic thought. And making believe that our preoccupation of attention blots that other sense of knowing out, which if we simply conceded it's always there, we just don't think it is, it would start to be easier to see that there is no risk in death, there is no risk in life, and that what we've been afraid of is not actually living, not dying. What we've been afraid of is really expressing our full nature and giving our full nature and being thoughtful enough to allow that nature to be expressed through us rather than limited by the ideas we use to resist it and think we can somehow prevail in that fight, when there is no fight in truth and reality at all, ever. It's just an ever-present nature. It doesn't fight because it's not at risk. It's impossible to get where we're going if we're unwilling within thinking. It's impossible to get where we're going if we continue to think we're not there. It just creates a loop that just goes around and around and around and around. If you look at history, you'll see it repeated over and over and over again, where looking back, it became very obvious somebody was on the wrong track. But while it went on, they were absolutely so cocksure it was the right way to go that it was actually bringing them closer to the demise of everything they claimed they were doing, while making believe there was no demise in the future. It was all going to go on forever. The fact is, an absolute nature is already not only forever, I wouldn't even say forever is possible in an absolute nature because it's always ever present. It isn't somewhere to get. It isn't somewhere to go. It's just here. And that dynamic of awareness is a big shift for thinking to begin to concede. And it allows thinking to actually do what it's designed to do, which is to express that fullness rather than the fractured states of things we think of and make believe somehow we'll put the pieces together like Humpty Dumpty. Once he was off the wall, that was it. Even as kids, we heard that and don't think of it as something that had any merit today when we're thinking in fractured thoughts and think somehow we're going to put the jigsaw puzzle back together when none of the pieces fit anymore. They never fit. They were all imagined, all illusions, thought to be real. How's your time?
It's good.
So I appreciate the chance to have this conversation, and it always feels a bit of a challenge to me because I know that I'm not a spokesman of any sort. And I know that I fail in many ways and have petty ideas all day long in some way or another that now I'm able to laugh at in a way that makes it more obvious what I'm doing rather than making believe I need to take them seriously. But there are also things I take so seriously and they're fixed beliefs that I haven't yet faced. And to any degree I'm reluctant in this conversation, I would say that reflects that. So I want to go, bright lights, full on, and move forward. That would be my goal. I don't always achieve that. My words don't always add up, and I'm not always able to capture all that's happening in my thoughts in words and translate them. So I appreciate your presence, and not just for today, but all the days that we've had together in being able to help develop that and utilize these concepts as a form of growth for both of us, not because there's anything to grow into, but there's thought to let go of that might give us the impression that we're less than we are, or have a lower sense of esteem than we actually do, or a lower sense of worth in addition that we actually do, because we're managing those thoughts as true and real. And that's been, you've been really important to me in that regard. And I say that because I don't have this conversation because I'm great at it. I have this conversation because I want to be better at it. And I want to be better at carrying it into my life during the week and confronting things as I see them, not to be confrontive and antagonistic, but to be helpful in some way. And I'm not always sure how to do that. And sometimes I do the wrong thing and people rear up, but I'm not sure rearing up is always indicating that it's the wrong thing. Sometimes I'm seeing that now as actually being a witness to the case that we make in this conversation, is that reactivity is a good indication we know better. And if people are struggling with it and using it as a form of defense and denial, it's weighing on them in ways that are depressing. And if they're not willing to look at those things like I have been unwilling, they will suffer like I have, the same depressing thoughts that I've had and the same seemingly impossible sort of life that I have felt and occasionally still do, because I'm attached to thoughts that I know aren't true, but I don't look at them honestly enough to allow them to begin to dissolve. And this conversation helps me do that in a big way. It sort of puts me face first and voice first. Even not being seen, we see each other while we're recording this. And my sense is that if there's a light, there is no darkness. And if there's darkness, I'm doing something about creating the shadows that cause the haunting images that I tend to fear. And the beauty of this process has been that I've learned to walk into that fear and face that fear and be with that fear and continue to move on the path that I sense is the right path by being open and honest and admit the vulnerabilities and weakness of my own inabilities in that process, rather than continue to make believe that somehow because I've gotten better at it, I'm better in any greater sense that's resolved and perfect in terms of my human expression. My humanity struggles and my ability to express it struggles. But these conversations, and you've been with me a long time in these conversations, and I don't know how many times a week we talk, but it's probably 4 or 5 times pretty regularly. And we generally have a 20 or 30-minute conversation, just checking in, saying hello, and kind of using the flashlight a little bit and saying, what do I think is in the dark, and kind of blow the lid off and then go back to our days and contemplate what we got and shared and all that. And I appreciate it a lot. I'm very thankful for you and many, many others, as you know, because you know many others probably more than I do.
Yeah, definitely, Jack. I appreciate that. And, what's coming to me now is, so why? The question why? Why are we having this conversation? Why is it important? Why do we, what I'm landing on for me as a personal why is I look at people who have achieved extraordinary accomplishments. You can call them many things, innovations, things like that. But a lot of it is like being, in my opinion, you're so connected to the absolute that you're able to navigate the physical world in a way that you're able to achieve not only beautiful accomplishments, but you're able to put a new path where there wasn't a new path. I mean, I think of people like, I hate to, like Elon Musk, of his innovation, he was like, yeah, we can have cheap rockets, we can have electric cars, all that stuff. And, it reminds
All
me
with a thought, Philip. All with
huh?
a thought. All starting with a thought. That's all.
All starting with a thought, but he just revealed on Twitter that Charlie Munger, the Berkshire Hathaway guy, who's worth maybe 1% of what he's worth now, in 2009, basically said, "Oh yeah, Tesla's going to be a failure." Blah blah blah. When they had a sit down, and he said he was sad about it. He was sad about having that being in that conversation.
Yeah.
But that being said, there is something in his absolute nature that knew that it was still possible to get to the point where, now electric vehicles are most likely going to be majority of the vehicles within 10, 15 years that are driving on the road. He also thought, it's a possibility to get to Mars. It's to use reusable rockets over and over again. If he let what Charlie Munger said define what he was going to do the next 11 to 12 years, he would have never gotten there. I look at like LeBron James or Michael Jordan, when they see the basketball court, they're able to see things that other people are not able to see quicker, and able to do things that other people are not able to do. And it's because a part of them is actually connected. I think, in my estimation, in a very profound way, they're very connected to the absolute, while other people are still lost in thoughts. What?
We all are. We all are. Everyone
Yeah.
is. We're just not expressing it when we're preoccupied with thoughts that don't exist, that are complete delusions, that are ideas. Lies are basically, think of a lie.
Mm-hmm.
A lie only claims to be true. As soon as a lie is a lie, it's no longer a lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's only claiming to be the opposite of what it is. That's like saying there's only good and no bad. They're related. There's a lie. It translates into the way that we see things. We think a lie can be true. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. The whole point of it is that it's claiming to be true, because it wouldn't be a lie if it were true. So that twisted nature is the core of this issue. And what you're describing, Philip, is somebody who knows, and they stand by what they know. They're not in doubt, though they can interact with people who are and wonder and question, but they have a course set because it's based in knowledge. The course of knowledge never changes. Our deviations change according to what we think. And when I'm in doubt, I know I'm thinking something doubtful. And when I know things, like I listened to a book the other day on a physicist, a mathematician, and the guy said that all great discoveries, when people have that epiphany, they know they no longer do any of the older stories they've been telling hold. They know it's right. Mm-hmm. They just know it. They haven't even applied it. They know they have it. Why? Because we know. And we've been so addicted to thinking that we need to think we know and think we need to understand that we've misplaced reason as our God, effectively. Mm-hmm. And it's not reasonable to think reason is the absolute source of our existence if there is an absolute source to our existence. So to use unreasonable thoughts and illogical thoughts as reasonable and logical is a lie, and it makes no sense. So we should feel confused, and we should feel doubtful. And when we do, we're admitting accurately that we know better, because we're assessing what's wrong accurately. And when we treat feeling to get over it, rather than saying this feeling is telling me what I'm thinking is wrong, we're going to perpetuate the problem once more in a new way, thinking it's brand new and it's going to be better, when all we're doing is helping make it worse. And that's insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. The results when it comes to truth and reality are in. The election was never held. It's just always been, period.
Yeah.
And where is it? Here, now. And your ability, my sense is, Philip, our thinking is designed to imagine all that can be done. And the sickness of mentally obsessive thinking has had us only consider what can't be done. And that's a sick consequence for a potential that we have, born out of love and generosity and support and ever expansiveness. Our imagination is designed to consider that we can do whatever we want. And we've been doing it all along, and that's the sick part of it. If what we've been doing is manifesting things to the corruption, the contamination, the pollution, all to justify that something else is wrong other than our thinking, we're missing the point that the corruption and the pollution and the contaminants in the thinking we're doing by making believe something with no substance has substance. And it's no irony that substance abuse is substance abuse, because the basic abuse is abusing the concept of substance by making believe something with no substance is substantive, because I think about it all the time. Once again, showing thinking is at the core of the sickness and the dis-ease. And we know it because we're ill at ease. And social ills reflected on the broader scale. And if I can't sit with someone and operate in a way that's honest, I am contributing to those social issues by simply infecting, like a contagion, the disease of that mentality by continuing to participate in it like a conspirator and foster it and pat people on the back and tell them it's going to be okay when it's okay right now. Mm-hmm. But they may not think it is, and start to confront what's actually happening rather than what we imagine is happening. We use imagination to imagine the worst. If we can imagine the worst, we can imagine much better. And some people in history have done that. And we are all capable of it in that elevated sense. To the degree that...
And I think also, I mean, maybe this will, well, Jack, if we look at your history, when did you move to Venice?
85-ish.
85-ish. And I know that you've been quite successful in real estate in Venice particular, but I would say one of those reasons is because you knew something that other people couldn't see way back probably in 85-ish, you know, of what it could be, right?
It was obvious. I knew what it was. I'd never been exposed to the arts, and I told my father that if I'd known these people when I grew up, I wouldn't have robbed all the neighbors' houses for fun. I said I didn't understand that subversion could be connected to productivity, and taking things apart at their essence could be connected to productivity. And I saw in the artists and the architects that that's what they were doing. They were challenging the precepts, so they challenged the limits by just going on it. They didn't even notice them. They just went beyond them. And that to me was very inspiring. And so my work was largely with them, and I took care of them as much as I possibly could. My business didn't succeed immediately, but I felt fulfilled by what I did for 10 years and didn't make any money. And then some money came, you know, and allowed me to retire early so I could do more of this work.
Yeah.
But it was a byproduct. In every case, anything that ever went well came as a result of some form of service and some form of help, not simply clawing for more and more and more, because I'd lost everything at 25. I'd had 6 homes at 25 and had nothing at 26, and took till probably 40 before I had anything that my kids could rely on that was beyond just the bare essentials. So, but sobriety, you know, if sobriety offers us anything, it's a freedom to begin to see the actual problem and work on a daily basis to begin to unravel that problem rather than continue to contribute to it, thinking someday it'll get better when in fact it always gets us worse and has us do that thing we know is not only the last thing we should do, but the thing we should never do, which in our case would be drinking and drugging and any kind of mind-altering substance that gives me the impression that I'm better while in fact I'm maintaining the problem that's worse, and I'm never going to get better that way. That doesn't allow me the chance to serve and to give and to pledge my days in the direction of you and I and them, rather than use you and them to excuse what I'm doing and blame and sit alone by myself and make believe that fostering those thoughts would be better, rather than seeing that all I'm doing is feeding a polluted pond that's never going to get better if it doesn't get fresh water.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I brought that up is because I think probably you getting sober and all that stuff connected you more to that knowingness. And eventually, at least not in every case, but in your case, it paid off to a certain extent, that knowingness and that service from that knowingness. And I think the reason why we do all this type of work and this type of conversation is when we connect to that absolute, the knowingness, and we're of service to it, and we try to put that out in the world, if, at least it's my experience, even though it hasn't to the degree that I've necessarily wanted, which is that story, but it has rewarded us, and it will continue to reward. And it wants to. That's the thing. It wants to reward people. The hard part is that we've just made a total construction of thoughts and lived in our thoughts and made that the status quo rather than the knowingness, the status quo. At least we think that.
Yes. And as you watch your words, you'll see that when we get sober, we don't get reconnected. We just notice that we've always been connected. Because the terms used, even in the big book, are absolute, unlimited, omnipotent, infinite, and all-powerful. None of those leave room for not being here now, not being our nature. We can think it's not our nature, but that doesn't mean it's not our nature. Our nature is our nature. Our nature is knowing. Our nature is absolutely that thing always, regardless of how delusional we get. And to think of the words we use is to show how quickly we make believe thinking is in fact our source, when we think because we don't think we're doing what we're doing, we're not doing what we're doing. And largely what we're doing is every voluntary action we ever take starts in a thought, every one of them. And if my thoughts are sick, I'm going to take sick actions, and that's not going to serve anyone. So the idea in sobriety that we start serving others is basically just realigning us to actions that actually are how we're designed. We're designed to be interactive, not inter-reactive. Mm-hmm. And yet, if we're faulty in thought, we're designed to interact as a clue that what we're thinking is wrong. And just like a GPS system trying to recalibrate when we make the wrong turn, it's giving us direction. And when we're addicted to the thinking, we refuse to accept the direction as anything other than something we're a victim to. So we continue to try to treat the feeling rather than notice the thought that's causing the feeling. It's a sickness. And it isn't any greater than we maintain it. It isn't some inherent thing that we can't get over when we're willing to continue to maintain it in the present as something that we think we can't get over. That's a choice we're making to think in those terms. Nothing more than that, ever. Mm-hmm. So where the freedom is always in the present. And where the condemnation comes is making believe that it's up to me to figure out how to get where I already am. It's a pretty big leap. It goes back to, I think, what you talked about last week. If I've already got it all, and I think I need to get somewhere else to get it, there's something wrong immediately. And it's no curiosity that when people get to that place they always thought they wanted to be, they don't feel the fulfillment they thought they'd get. Because all it was all along was a thought it was somewhere else that they'd eventually get to. And when they get there and find it's not there, look at history in terms of literature, fairy tales, mythology. It's all based on that vain attempt. Much of it tells that story over and over and over and over and over again. And we keep trying to figure it out while we're thinking the thoughts that continue to make believe it's a curiosity rather than we absolutely know better. we know so well that when we finally admit it, my experience was it came with a jolt of fear and then was followed by tears and an awareness that was warming instead of cold. That was a beginning of actually global warming in a sense, because I saw the world as something much different than I'd always held it as being. I was no longer a victim to it and being attacked by it. I was actually seeing that my own limitations in thought is what compelled those opinions to be perpetuated to justify my continuing. And that everybody's intact and everybody has the exact same dignity. They may have different bodily attributes that they can express in different ways, but in our essence, we're the same. And if we can get worse, we can always get better. If we're so convinced that we can always be worse, that's pretty sick to think and miss the point that we can always then get better.
Well, yeah, and it's just not beneficial. It's just not beneficial to us.
Well, it's beneficial to the degree that it sort of matches our willingness to maintain it by giving us experiences to suggest it's wrong. And eventually those experiences, in the book, it says pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. Interesting that we need pain, which is an indication something's wrong, that we use to justify the thing we're doing is right, because if it didn't hurt, it wouldn't be real. Rather than look at it and say, oh, this is telling me something's wrong. I hurt. I stubbed my toe. I broke my back. I need attention. And what do? Keep it to ourselves. Think more about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I break my leg, I tend to go to a hospital and say I need help. If I break my train of thought, or I'm afraid to break I don't mention it to people often. I don't just say, look, I'm really struggling with these thoughts right now. And I know immediately they're not true. They're not real, whatever they are. I don't need to tell the whole fucking story.
Yeah.
The story only helps reinforce it by justifying it. It's an excuse, which is largely what stories do. Moral stories have a point. You can always just get to the point. And do people always listen? No, I don't always listen. Are they capable? Absolutely. Always, always, always. And to see it that way is to give people a little more credit than discredit. So that when I approach people, in my experience, I approach them knowing that people know everything, and all they're struggling with is what they think about it. And that becomes a lot easier job to talk about than thinking I need to convince them of something, because if they already know it, there's no convincing needed. To simply have them begin to be aware of it and have those seeming epiphanies, but they're really just beginning to admit what they've always known, because they're not chronically maintaining the thought that gives them the impression that it isn't happening. And that is true for anybody. If it's true for anyone, I would say it's true for everyone.
Yeah.
Not to suggest people don't suffer from things that are difficult to deal with, but the question is, if we can get better, wouldn't it be worth doing something in the direction of better than continuing to compliment the idea that we can't overcome something? If we can make that thing we have worse, we can certainly get better.
So maybe this is a point to at least end my participation in this conversation, at least on the podcast, is I notice in myself an addiction to always having something to overcome, some obstacle, whether it was my weight.
You talked about it last time.
Yeah, whatever it is. And so for me, I think what I'm going to leave with in this conversation is I always have an obstacle because I always think I have an obstacle and I need an obstacle.
Bingo. And you know why?
Because I think it.
Because you think thinking can be an obstacle.
Yeah.
And so what do? Make believe it's an obstacle. And what is it? A thought. And you know how many times you repeat it? Every time you repeat it. Every moment is new. Right now. You know what that thought takes to continue? You continuing to reinforce it at every one of those points all the time.
Yeah.
And to think we're not doing it is to continue doing it and think we're not doing it, because we're training ourselves to make believe that belief, in fact, why would we believe in something that's true and real? There'd be no reason to believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no faith in it. If reality and truth are real and true, it doesn't require faith on my part for it to be. And if it's always been that way for me, all I have is a lack of faith in my thinking about it.
Yeah.
And my belief is admitting that I don't believe it, which is often the case, because my circumstances often overwhelm me and situations don't go where I hope they do. And the ease of life is often confronted by things that seem to be threats. And the question I always have is, well, am I going to make this better or am I going to make this worse? And if I'm worried about what it is right now, there's a good chance I'll continue to make it worse to get to the point where I have to concede that it's what I've been doing that's making it worse, rather than the problem that I have mistaken as something much bigger than it really is. And then problems become challenges and just things that occur that, you know, if you're out at sea and you come into a harbor and the harbor's got rocks around it to keep the waves from tipping all the boats over, and you run into the rocks, you got a problem. You may not want to go around it, but, you know, what's the alternative? Ruining the boat, not getting into the port. So making those adjustments are much different than seeing them as these huge problems that I've always tend to make the problem so big because I haven't wanted to admit they're just what I'm making of it to begin with. And I think it's something that's just this onerous curse that's happening to me, rather than seeing it as an actual manifestation to give me a chance to get the perspective that I'm unwilling to offer myself, but I'm offering it to myself and creating the problem so I can look back and say, wow, how am I involved in this? Or I am involved in this is even simpler. This is a creation of my own making. I am seeing it this way. If there is a problem here, it is not made better by my making more of it than it actually is, ever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of getting back into my own seat, my own feet, and saying, wow, how I'm seeing it is what I'm struggling with, not what it is. If I saw it as nothing, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And many of the things I've had problems with, I've made much bigger problems to confirm my original thought was true when it wasn't at all. So disbanding that and starting to let that go is allowing the day to become this sort of parade of opportunities to witness how willing I am to go in whatever direction I choose to go, and see that I've always made those choices accurately. They may be based on sick thoughts, but sick thoughts accurately are going to be sick. The action's going to be sick. It's accurate for the instigation of the thought. It's accurate as a reflection of that thought. Doesn't mean it's correct in the way that allows things that are right to be. I mean, if we talk about right and wrong earlier, what my suspicion is that right is what works, what's useful, what's productive. That's right in the world in terms of our experience. Because if we went and farmed for 6 months and never produced a crop, people would starve. That doesn't sound like the goal of survival. Doesn't sound like what it takes for us. We're designed to satisfy our needs, not to completely constrict them and undermine them and end up turning our whole apple cart, per se, over and not being able to benefit from the value of the apples or ruining them. That would be contrary to our instinct to survive and grow and thrive.
It just reminds me, like, the mind is just like your eyes, because, you know, what we see, objects in spaces, what is it? Usually a reflection of light.
Yes.
We don't see the actual object.
Right.
So in a way, like, the playing field of our lives, whatever we see is usually just a reflection of our thoughts.
Absolutely. And now what's interesting, Philip, is when you begin to see that and really sit with it, the obsessive nature of thinking what we're seeing is what we think you'll begin to realize that isn't the case, and you'll begin to actually have a relationship with what's going on that is not dependent on thought, because it never has been. But now you've introduced thought to its proper role, and you're not obsessively thinking everything that you're seeing is how you're seeing it, because you're realizing that thinking is just something you're doing with it rather than simply observing it and having a peaceful relationship to it, rather than one that's in conflict over seeing it as you think it is rather than as it is. And the stress begins to relieve. It's what's interesting about nature is that as the stress begins to be relieved, it feels so natural not to be stressed that you don't always notice the progress because it just feels easier. And it sometimes takes the same time that it takes a problem to become obvious to begin to realize, oh, I don't deal with things the way I used to. It took me a little time to say, oh, I'm a lot easier about, a lot less reactive, a lot more willing to let people have their opinions and their thoughts. I know their thoughts. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thought. That's a thought. Not, my whole life is dependent on fighting this person because they offended me. Why would I be offended if I wasn't defensive?
That reminds me of, I was doing this film, and, I end up seeing, just around town, I ended up seeing Anthony Hopkins and going up and talking to him. And he had done a film with the same director. And I remember for a moment he was talking about acting. He's like, it's really easy. Like, it's just easy. And I just remember thinking I think I was 25, my 25-year-old brain, like, what? Like, it's just easy. But now, taking into context what he said then to what we're talking about now, in terms of my mind is just seeing it's just reflecting the thoughts that I'm having.
Yes.
It's, and I'm doing this new training that I've done in the past, but really what it's about is the whole technique hinges on what is your thought about what was just said or done. And you're just reflecting that back in what you're saying next. um, it's just kind of coming to me all the like how easy it actually is when you just treat it that simply, you know?
Well, let me suggest to you, it's already always that easy before we think we need to treat it. The treatment we're giving it is the one that we think we need treatment to recover from.
Mm-hmm.
It's already simple. And dis-ease is simply dismissing the ease by thinking the dis-eased thought, the thought that wants to make believe what thought is and what thought thinks is what reality is what creates the word dis-ease. And what does that do? Throws our whole body out of balance. Why? Because it's bearing a weight it's not designed to bear healthfully or healthfully,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what does it do? Creates diseases. It's accurately accounting for what we're doing. Why? Because responsibility is our nature. It isn't something we can take or give. It isn't something that we're only doing when we're acting responsibly. We're responsible for acting irresponsibly too. It's not something that's negotiable. And beginning to kind of consider that in the slightest way is both relieving and also confrontive of all those irresponsible thoughts we thought were who we are, because the who we are begins to be obviously based in thought rather than in actual reality. So when you talk about yourself and all that, my self-doubt is a doubting self that has good cause to doubt because it isn't who I am, it's what I think. In the same way that we think about the world as being seen the way we think it is.
Yeah. Well, as I usually end our phone calls, I think that's enough for me to contemplate moving forward, at least for today.
Two
That I'm
questions for you.
capable of.
Two questions. You asked the question, why are we having this conversation? Which I think is a great question, because people have asked me that for years while I seem to constantly be in it.
Yeah.
And then secondly, since we just did this together, do you want to do, since this would have been the third episode of the three of us, do you want to do another one of these with me at some point in the next week or so? I've got an interview set for next week that we're going to record, and do two of these between us and see what comes as a result of this conversation into the next one.
Yeah, we could do that. I would say end of the week.
This week?
Yeah, the end of this week. Yeah.
Okay. I have the time. I will set the time aside. And the point of this for listeners is to show that even in the certainty of what sounds certain between us, there is growth that occurs as a result of these conversations and awareness that becomes palpable enough to put words to in ways that might make some sense and be valuable enough to be heard. And the process of this is more of an adventure and exploration than the sense of damnation that comes from the blame and fault and all that of thinking about who's responsible for what. When we become free in the admission of recognizing that we're absolutely responsible, we become free of thinking there's anyone else to blame, and we don't even need to blame ourselves. We just know we're responsible, period. There's no blame and fault in responsibility, like there are no victims in responsibility. There are no victims in an absolute nature because there are no causes and effects. There's just an ever-present state of being that we all share. And humans have struggled with this by naming it and fighting over the terms they use to define it. And I'm not interested in engaging around issues that are further conflicted than our already present state of any conflicted thinking we're doing, and starting to unravel that thinking simply in a conversation and looking at it. My sense is nature occurs all the time. And when we're willing to admit it, we start acting naturally before we even think about it, because nature knows what to do, and so do we. So, Philip, I'm going to use your question, why are we having this conversation? And I'll upload this later this morning, and then you and I will make a plan. So I'll call this Philip 1.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we can do that.
And everyone listening, we're very happy to have your ears and to have you participating, and knowing that something I heard once was that darkness cannot hide from light. And any light that we're able to speak to, I would imagine, is enlightening for everyone, and also suggesting that our natural state is enlightened, regardless of the thoughts we have that cast shadows and create haunting images that we seem to suffer from. So if we're capable of talking about it openly and listening, we're capable of recognizing that we have a knowing sense that neither I or Philip need to tell you, to simply witness that as humans, we may be sharing this same thing in the same way. And maybe there are ways we can continue to consider things that open us up to a nature that we have been busy denying and refusing to express, that's always been available to all of us and always will be. And we look forward to hearing you and having you hear us whenever you're interested in continuing.
Sounds good, Jack. I'll talk to you and we'll figure it out. Okay.
Love you, brother.
All right. Love you too.